My wife Lisa and I and our two little daughters, Emily, who was 5, and Sophie, who had just turned 3, were headed to the tropical paradise of Coral Bay Island, known for its pristine beaches and crystal clear waters. We were all thrilled, especially the girls, who couldn't contain their enthusiasm for their first airplane ride. The airplane was a brand new model, sparkling with modern technology and a shiny interior. We settled into our seats, anticipating the beginning of the adventure. About an hour into the flight, I noticed a commotion a few rows ahead. One of the passengers had fainted, and the flight attendants urgently called for medical assistance. I didn't think much of it at first, knowing that such incidents sometimes happen on flights. The medics who came on board rushed to my aid, and we thought the situation was under control. About an hour later, however, I was overcome by a wave of anxiety. My stomach churned and I felt dizzy. Nausea clawed at my insides. Ignoring the discomfort, I decided to get up and find a restroom to relieve myself, hoping it was just a bout of motion sickness caused by the turbulence. As I approached the galley, I noticed that both toilets were occupied. I was about to return to my seat when suddenly everything around me went dark. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the cold floor, my face throbbing with pain and my left leg screaming in pain. Flight attendants surrounded me, frantically applying ice packs to my back. My disoriented state prevented me from fully comprehending the situation. I heard them say that I had lost consciousness and that my face had knocked the flight attendant's phone off the wall during the fall. In doing so, I suffered a fractured radius bone in my left shin and a third-degree sprain in my left ankle. I lay in pain and confusion for what seemed like hours. Meanwhile, my wife Lisa slept without noticing my absence. When she finally awoke from her slumber, she realized something was wrong. Panic gripped her when she noticed I was missing. She rushed to the galley and found me lying on the floor, shivering and in shock. She demanded blankets from the flight attendants who, because of my disoriented state, didn't even think to ask if I was flying with anyone. As the flight continued, more and more passengers began to faint or pass out. One man fainted in the galley next to me, but this time the flight attendants were prepared, thanks to my previous episode, and made sure he fell as gently as possible. The flight attendants exchanged knowing looks and joked that I was probably just a nervous flyer. I couldn't help but feel uneasy. After all, I'd often flown for work without any problems. With about 2 hours left in the flight, the flight attendants announced that they would be serving food. Ignoring my protests, they demanded that I return to my seat. I hesitantly made my way to my seat. My left leg was hurting badly and my sprained ankle was causing searing pain with every step. As soon as I settled into my seat, the pain became unbearable, and I felt myself slipping back into shock. This time it happened quickly. I passed out again, I vomited, and worst of all, I wet my pants. My 5-year-old daughter, Emily, sat next to me and watched this horrifying scene. She was shocked, her innocent eyes widened with fear. Amidst all this chaos, one of the passengers watching shared a shocking revelation. He said that this particular model of airplane had a known problem with burning oil entering the cabin through the air circulation system. This explains why passengers were getting sick and passing out throughout the flight. Despite the problems with the airplane, we did arrive in Coral Bay, albeit shaken and traumatized. Our family vacation began with an unexpected and terrifying ordeal, and it will be a long time before we can only remember the experience with a shudder. We had hoped for paradise and received a nightmare under the sky. In the heart of Central Asia, amidst the bustling city of Tashkent, two strangers found themselves seated side by side on a plane bound for the vibrant city of Dubai. Their names were Emily and Michael, a chance encounter on a journey that would forever change their lives. The excitement in the air was palpable as the plane taxied down the runway, ready to take off into the Arabian night. The allure of Dubai's towering skyscrapers, golden deserts, and shimmering beaches awaited them. They were on their way to a dream vacation, eager to explore a world far removed from their everyday lives. As the plane soared higher into the skies, Emily and Michael couldn't help but marvel at the breathtaking view outside their windows. The city of Tashkent slowly faded away, replaced by vast expanses of desert. Little did they know that this picturesque journey would soon take an unexpected turn. Hours into the flight, when most passengers were either asleep or engrossed in their in-flight entertainment, A sudden announcement broke the calm of the cabin. The flight attendants' voices trembled as they uttered the words, "Pilot incapacity." Emily and Michael exchanged anxious glances. The words hung heavy in the air, filled with an unsettling sense of uncertainty. The captain had suffered a seizure, a medical emergency at 35,000 feet above the ground. Panic rippled through the cabin, and the flight attendants quickly assured everyone that the situation was under control. The plane's descent into Shiraz was swift, and the passengers could see the city's lights twinkling below. It was an emergency landing, guided by the able hands of the co-pilot and the air traffic control team on the ground. The landing was smoother than anyone could have hoped for under the circumstances, and the relief in the cabin was palpable. An ambulance awaited the plane on the tarmac, and Emily and Michael watched as the medical team rushed to the cockpit to attend to the ailing pilot. They were relieved to see the stretcher wheeled out, the captain still conscious. The intercom crackled to life once again, and the airline spokesperson informed the passengers that the pilot was stable and receiving medical attention. The mood in the cabin lightened, but many questions remained unanswered. As the hours passed in Shiraz, a city known for its rich history and stunning gardens, Emily and Michael found themselves in a peculiar situation. Stranded in a foreign land, they watched as airport staff buzzed around, trying to find a solution. Their fellow passengers seemed to be coping with the situation, sharing stories and trying to make the best of an unexpected layover. Emily and Michael decided to venture out of the airport, eager to explore a slice of Iran they had not anticipated. They visited a local bazaar, sampled Persian cuisine, and marveled at the intricate architecture of ancient mosques. Despite the stress of the situation, the unplanned detour allowed them to experience a city they might have otherwise missed. Back at the airport, news began to circulate. The pilot's condition was improving, but it was uncertain if he would be allowed to fly again. The airline was working diligently to arrange a new crew for the stranded passengers. Hours turned into a day, and the weary travelers grew restless, wondering if they would ever reach their dream destination. Finally, late in the afternoon of the following day, the new crew arrived, and the plane was prepped for departure once again. Emily and Michael, along with their fellow passengers, boarded the aircraft, now with mixed feelings of relief and trepidation. The journey to Dubai resumed, this time with a renewed sense of anticipation, as the plane took off from Shiraz and headed towards the glittering metropolis that beckoned them. In the heart of the American Midwest, where amber waves of grain stretched as far as the eye could see, lay the city of Wheatfield. Wheatfield was a tranquil and picturesque town, known for its vast farmlands and a small, nondescript airport that served as a gateway to the world for its residents. It was here that the protagonist of our story, Sarah Thompson, found herself on that fateful day. Sarah, a seasoned businesswoman, was on her way to an important meeting in Chicago. She had flown countless times in her career, and the routine of air travel had become second nature to her. Little did she know that this flight would be unlike any other, and it would push her to the brink of terror. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the fields, Sarah boarded the regional jet that would take her to Chicago. The flight was packed with a diverse group of travelers, from businessmen engrossed in their laptops to families eager to explore the windy city. It was a typical evening departure from Wheatfield. The airplane taxied to the runway, its engines humming to life. The passengers settled into their seats, and Sarah gazed out of the window, enjoying the view of the rolling plains. Little did she know that, at that very moment, her life was about to take a heart-pounding turn. As the plane accelerated down the runway, the sense of anticipation filled the cabin. But then, a sudden jolt rocked the aircraft, and a collective gasp of alarm swept through the passengers. In the fading light, Sarah could see a flurry of feathers and hear the sickening thud as the airplane hit a flock of geese during takeoff. The collision with the geese was violent, causing the plane to shudder and shake. A loud bang echoed through the cabin, and then, all at once, the lights went out. The passengers were plunged into darkness, and the plane began to descend, the cockpit crew struggling to maintain control. Panic set in as the plane's descent became more pronounced. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she clung to her seat, unable to see anything in the inky blackness. Passengers cried out in fear, and the cabin was filled with frantic voices. The airplane's engines had failed, and they were descending rapidly toward the unknown. Amid the chaos, the flight attendants, with trained calmness, tried to reassure the passengers and guide them through the emergency procedures. The plane's emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow over the frightened faces of those on board. The crew communicated with air traffic control, desperately seeking a safe place to land. Moments later, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've experienced an engine failure and have lost all power. We will be making an emergency landing. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain calm." The announcement did little to quell the mounting fear, but the passengers complied, strapping themselves in for the imminent crash landing. Sarah closed her eyes and said a silent prayer, her thoughts racing as the ground loomed closer and closer. The landing was rough, the screech of metal against pavement sending shivers down Sarah's spine. The plane shook violently, but the crew's skill and the aircraft's design ensured that the emergency landing, although far from smooth, was survivable. The cabin erupted into applause as the plane came to a halt on the tarmac, and a collective sigh of relief filled the air. As the passengers disembarked from the plane, they were met with the flashing lights of emergency vehicles and a sense of gratitude that they had survived the harrowing ordeal. The collision with the geese had been a stroke of misfortune, but the skill and training of the cockpit crew had saved their lives. Hours passed as the passengers waited for news of their next flight. The airport staff worked diligently to accommodate the stranded travelers. It turned out that they would have to wait approximately 8 hours for a new airplane to be ready. Sarah and her fellow passengers found themselves in an unlikely situation, strangers, brought together by a brush with death, forced to wait together for their next flight. The atmosphere in the airport terminal was a mix of exhaustion, relief, and camaraderie. As the hours ticked by, stories were exchanged, friendships were formed, and the sense of adventure lingered in the air. Sarah, initially dreading the long delay, found herself in the company of fellow survivors, each with their own tale of the unexpected. In those hours of waiting, she forged connections with people she would have never met otherwise. The experience had reminded her of the fragility of life and the importance of seizing the moment. James, a tired traveler, found himself on a plane flying to Dallas, Texas. He had just finished a week of intense business meetings in New York City and was looking forward to reuniting with his family, who had already arrived at their destination. So far, the flight had been relatively uneventful. James chose a window seat despite his many flights. He always preferred to admire the scenery below. The plane rose smoothly above the clouds, offering a mesmerizing view of the world below. In the same row as James sat a romantic couple and an elderly woman engrossed in a thick novel. As James approached the middle of the flight, however, a sense of unease began to envelop James. Dark clouds appeared ahead and the sky became increasingly turbulent. The altitude decreased and turbulence increased, and the cabin shook. Looking out the porthole, James saw the ominous sight of a severe thunderstorm, the dark, huge monster of billowing clouds and electric blue flickers. His anxiety turned to fear, and he gripped the armrests tightly. And then it happened. A deafening bang echoed through the airplane, followed by an intense flash of light that illuminated the cabin with an eerie glow. The terrified passengers turned to each other, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. "Did we just get struck by lightning?" whispered someone in a voice trembling with fear. This question echoed in the heads of everyone on board, and the gravity of the situation was realized. As if sensing the collective alarm, the pilot's calm voice broke through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I want to assure you that we have just been struck by lightning. However, our airplane is designed for situations like this. There is no need to worry. We are safe." The pilot's words did little to help the passengers. There was a sigh of relief, but the cabin was still tense. James felt an uneasiness in his stomach, realizing that he was completely at the mercy of the storm raging outside. The thunderstorm was intensifying, creating turbulence in the airplane. The rumblings of thunder were a constant reminder that they were surrounded by a riot of nature. James tried to distract himself by reading a book, but he couldn't distract himself by looking out the window. The dark clouds contrasted sharply with the white wings of the airplane. The hours passed slowly, and the tension in the cabin remained palpable. Conversations fell silent, laughter unabated. Passengers clutched into the armrests, praying for this ordeal to end. Flashes of lightning and peals of thunder became an unsettling backdrop to the flight. Time passed and fatigue began to weigh on the passengers. James, who had hoped to get some much-needed rest during the flight, was unable to sleep. The airplane rocked with every gust of wind. Each flash of lightning was a painful reminder of the severe thunderstorm they were passing through. The lights in the cabin were dimmed, and the passengers were trying to get comfortable. But sleep still wouldn't come. James looked around and saw a number of restless travelers. Some were watching movies, some were reading, and some were trying to sleep despite the restlessness. James, however, found it almost impossible to relax. The lightning outside flashed relentlessly, casting eerie, strobe-like shadows across the cabin. It was a vivid reminder of the storm's relentlessness. As the hours dragged on, James became more and more immersed in his thoughts. He pondered the fragility of human existence in the face of such force, the vulnerability of a metal pipe floating in the storm. Finally, as dawn broke and the storm began to subside, a collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. The soothing voice of a flight attendant came over the intercom announcing the descent at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The passengers, though fatigued and shaken, knew they had made it through the stormy night. As the wheels of the plane touched the ground, James couldn't help but reflect on the experience. He had faced his fear, a thunderstorm at 30,000 feet, and came out of it different. The stability of the airplane and the skill of the pilot proved to be their saviors. Relieved to be on solid ground again, James retrieved his luggage and entered the terminal where he was met by his family. The stormy night in the sky was a vivid reminder of the unpredictability of life, and he embraced his loved ones with renewed vigor, thanking them for their safe reunion after a tumultuous journey into the heart of the storm. In the bustling city of Covington, nestled among the rolling hills of Ohio, there was an unassuming little airport that most people had never heard of. Covington Airport was a place where dreams took flight and strangers embarked on journeys that would change their lives forever. For Kevin Mitchell, a mild-mannered accountant from Cincinnati, this small airport would become the setting for a life-altering experience. Kevin had always been a creature of habit. He led a quiet life, meticulously planning every detail of his days. But that fateful day, he decided to break free from his routine and take an impromptu flight. It was a sunny afternoon, and a whim led him to the Covington Airport. The decision to board a small, private plane for a quick getaway was entirely out of character for him. As Kevin settled into the small cabin of the single-engine Cessna, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. His fellow passengers were a diverse group, ranging from a couple of adventurous backpackers to a family with 2 young children. It seemed like a simple, uneventful journey to an undisclosed destination, and Kevin was eager to escape the monotony of his everyday life. Not during the flight, but the moment the plane started to lift off the ground. The engine Kevin was sitting next to exploded. The deafening roar of the explosion sent shockwaves through the cabin. Panic and chaos gripped the passengers as the plane shuddered and began to lose altitude. Kevin's heart raced, and his mind struggled to process what had just happened. Smoke and acrid fumes filled the cabin, making it difficult to breathe. Passengers screamed, and the children cried. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, strained and frantic. "Brace for impact, brace for impact." Kevin felt a surge of adrenaline. He clutched the armrests of his seat, his knuckles turning white. The plane was descending rapidly, and the ground was rushing up to meet them. He could see the treetops approaching at an alarming speed through the scratched window. The sense of impending doom weighed heavily on his chest. In those terrifying moments, as the plane plummeted towards the earth, Kevin couldn't help but reflect on his life. He had always been a man of caution and predictability, a man who rarely took risks. Yet here he was, facing the most unexpected and perilous situation of his life. The seconds stretched into eternity, and the passengers braced themselves for the inevitable impact. But then, as suddenly as it had all begun, the plane's descent came to an abrupt halt. The passengers were jolted in their seats as the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom again. "We're okay. We're leveling off. Please remain calm." Relief washed over the passengers as the plane stabilized. It became evident that the pilot, with nerves of steel, had managed to regain some control over the damaged aircraft. But the ordeal was far from over. The engine on the right wing was a charred wreck, and the plane was now flying at a dangerously low altitude. Kevin's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. He looked around at the other passengers, their faces still pale with fear. In that moment, he felt a profound connection to these strangers. They had all experienced a brush with death together, and it had changed them in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. As the minutes ticked by, the pilot announced that they would attempt an emergency landing at the nearest airport. The passengers held their collective breath as the plane descended once more, this time approaching a runway surrounded by emergency vehicles and firefighters. The landing was rough, but the skilled pilot managed to touch down without further incident. The plane came to a halt, and the passengers burst into applause, grateful for their second chance at life. The ordeal had forged a bond among them, transcending their differences and backgrounds. Once safely on the ground, the passengers exited the aircraft and were met by a swarm of reporters and curious onlookers. Kevin and the others recounted their harrowing experience to the media, and the story quickly made headlines. But for Kevin, the true impact of the event went far beyond the news coverage.